Me? Yeah. So you know, yeah. Perfect. I feel like yeah. Shall we get started? Can you hear me? Anton, can you hear me? Alexandra? Yeah,
Yes.
perfect. Okay, lovely. So guys, we're going to get started here. Thanks again to my speakers today, who just very quickly to introduce you. On the screen, we have Anton Yarotsky, who's a farmer from Ukraine. We have Alexandra Avramenko, who's the head of European integration at the Ukrainian Agribusiness Club. And then starting from me, we have Gianpiero Naci. We have Alessandro Cataldi from EY. Gianpiero is from EBRD. Yes, thank you. Thank you. We have Fred from Agrina, and we have Marta Trofinova from Kernel. My name is Paul Benjamin from Bloomberg NEF. So just for brief context, we're talking about the decarbonization of agriculture. And just to set the scene very briefly, we probably all know that food and agriculture is about 1/3 of emissions, roughly. The key thing is, though, the emissions are not equally distributed. Much of the emissions happens at the stage of farming. And equally, when you look at profitability across the value chain, that's also not equally distributed. And farming is arguably the leg with one of the lower legs of profitability. So we have a situation where the value chain segment that actually needs to transform is not very profitable. So a key theme in our discussion throughout will be to find mechanisms of how we can financially incentivize farmers to change practice and to transition. So having said that, maybe I'll turn it over to Alessandro to maybe set the stage on sort of how you see what is the role of agriculture in climate, mitigation and adaptation, and set some context about Ukrainian agriculture.
Thank you, Paul, for putting me in the spotlight. And actually, I'm first and foremost a farmer myself, so I'm glad to see fellow farmers as well, both virtually and live here. I lead also the agriculture practice of EY in EMEA, and the reason we focused here is because we believe that agriculture has a fundamental role to play to help our ambition around climate change. And the reason behind it, yes, the food systems, including agriculture, are responsible for over 1/3 of our global emissions. So as a farmer, I feel like a criminal. I'm responsible for a lot of emissions. I'm responsible for a lot of water use. But the reality is I'm actually sitting on a gold mine, which is our soils, and the ability of our soils to act as very powerful carbon sinks as well. So I believe the agriculture is part of the problem, but it's also a fundamental part of the solution as well that can fundamentally help us achieve three things: food security and how we can feed our 10 billion people by 2050. The second thing is help us, really solve some of the issues we've got around climate, in particular if we adopt regenerative agriculture practices at large scale. And the third one, through substantially increasing farmers' incomes by helping them maintain productivity and increase yields and therefore earn more and therefore lift many farmers out of poverty. But you touched a very important point, which is farmers mental for feeding the rest of the world. And actually, the farmers that produce a positive output, which feeds the rest of the population, is a single-digit percentage of our global population. And yet these farmers receive the smallest part of their profit pool that is created between farm and fork. So we need to rethink our system substantially, both from a climate and from a value distribution point of view as well.
Thank you, Alessandro. Let me actually straight away bring Anton into this discussion, because practice change, as we've established, has to be done by the farmer. So Anton, give us a minute on your perspective on this. How does it feel for you to be part of this transformation, and what are the sort of barriers and incentives that you face?
Thank you. I'm experiencing climate change on my farm last 5 years, and I'm thinking that I should start to do something with that much earlier. But as it is, and I must say that I'm happy that all that carbon initiative started. I met Agrina, and it helped me a lot. But the phrase I like that all that heavy lifting, farmers should do the whole year, but they are receiving payments, whether it's a commodities or some ecological services, only once a year. So I need to pay the bills the whole year and survive somehow. And that's the thing that I want to discuss, that it should be some like financial instruments, like Charlie Munger's favorite leverage, to help to increase every spent euro 10 times, 20 times, to invest more in our sustainable practices. And for sure, I understand it should not be rewarded not only for practices, but also it should be outcome based for sure. But we need to look for instruments to pay and help farmers on a daily basis, because sometimes it's very hard to stay concentrated on our climate obligations, not awaiting our contract obligations.
Thank you, Anton. Alexandra, let me bring you in on the screen. Give us a bit of context about potential Ukrainian integration with the EU and what that means for Ukrainian agriculture. What are the things that you need to harmonize, or what are the things you think about when you're thinking about potential integration with the EU?
Well, thank you very much for the question. First of all, thank you for organizing such discussion. I'm very happy to see the panelists. I hope that there is a full audience. And luckily, I hope you enjoy the weather, because Anton and we're in Ukraine currently, so we are in sweaters, reminding that there is still winter in Ukraine. So just a quick reminder to our reality. That's first thing. The second thing is that besides we have a winter, we also have the European integration process in Ukraine. Definitely, it will touch all the spheres of our life, especially in agricultural sector, which is very much important, not just for Ukrainian society, but also for the survival of Ukrainian economy, especially in times of war that we have right now. Getting back to your question, Paul, what I can say is that Ukrainian agricultural sector will have to change quite significantly in terms of adaptation to the EU current system, because European Union itself is already in the process of reducing the carbon emission, and also implementation of different green and more sustainable practices into the practice, basically. But what Anton said, and which is very much important to our day right now, is that farmers should survive somehow. So Ukraine, besides having the one aim right now to survive, and this also touches the whole agricultural sector and all agricultural producers, besides it needs to survive, it also needs to think about the European integration and also implementation of those sustainable practices. So I would say these two sides are very much up to date, very much on the top of the agenda. And what I can say is that besides some agricultural companies are already in the process of adaptation and implementation of more sustainable practices, there should be still a lot of work done in terms of spreading the information, implementation, and sharing the know-how and further their implementation in everyday life of average Ukrainian farmer and agricultural producer.
Thank you. So let's start talking about solutions in a sense. Fred, if you could give us a bit of context about Agrina, and then we can dive into the specifics of Ukraine, how you see that as being different from the other markets you operate in. But just a bit of context about Agrina would be useful to start.
Yeah, so Agrina is a agtech company. We operate in 17 different countries. We have around 1 million farmers on our platform and approximately 2 million hectares under management. What our platform really does together with our program is that it helps measure and calculate and verify outcomes, so GSG removals and reductions. So it's really an active tool to help financialize the transition to more regenerative practices. And that's really the business we're in.
Right. Just a clarification on that for those who are less familiar with this. Essentially, this is getting funding to farmers who are effecting practice change. Now, there are two ways of doing this. You can get money from within the food value chain, and you can get money from outside of the food value chain. The solution that you have, is it primarily focused on getting money from outside the food value chain into farming, or does it work for both contexts?
We actually work with 3 different services. I think the one we would highlight today is the VCM carbon credit scheme, which is but the basis is the same. So we create a baseline for the farmers. We help, verify the outcomes of that transition.
Yeah.
And there is, as you said, there's a short-term yield decrease when they transition, and it's that yield decrease and that uncertainty that we try to finance. And we do it via the VCM market. We do it via proof points within the value. So actually a dummy value on the rights for the GSG removals together with grains. And then we're also working on financing green loans for farmers.
Thank you. Marta, let me come to you. You're probably the largest or one of the largest agribusinesses in Ukraine. One of the key things that I struggle with when I look at the transition is we're not seeing a real willingness to absorb premiums further within the value chain. There seems to be it's early days, it's kind of voluntary commitments, but we still haven't seen the path to scale of food companies adopting or the willingness to pay for practice change. Very interested in getting your views as an agribusiness. Maybe give us a bit of context. Do you sell oilseeds just to the food value chain, or is it fuels as well? And then how do you think about transitioning to low carbon, selling low carbon goods? Can you get more money for it?
Thank you for the question. So just quickly about, it's only the food value chain for now, because I remember speaking about this to one of my top managers, and she mentioned it would be too heartbreaking to sell a sunflower oil to be put in biodiesel and into cars. But just quickly to kind of give you the context is, I really like that we have different types of actors on this panel. So medium, small. It's small, comparatively small, but it's a medium-sized farmer from Ukraine, and also the large agriculture company that has a lot of resources, that has a lot of expertise accumulated in one company. And in terms of implementing our regenerative agriculture practices, we have quite a track record. So just to give you a quick example, 90% of our land bank is under reduced tillage. by 2023, we had 22,000 hectares covered by cover crops, and the plan is to increase it. And we have started implementing and testing inhibitors of nitrification, so really targeting one of the key contributors to GHG emissions in agriculture practices. Now, of course, the rationale for this to really escalating these practices would be the financial incentive, what we're all interested in. The extra EBITDA per hectare or extra premium. But as a big company, I think as one of the leaders in the sector in Ukraine, we don't look at this only as a short-term perspective and short-term benefit in terms of getting the monetary value and then just stopping doing it if the market collapses. We're looking at it from the perspective as really contributing to the advancement of this market and these practices. We see ourselves as a role model, it's our prerogative to really build the partnerships, to cascade and extrapolate our practices across the rest of the market players, to build the partnership with the policymakers, with donors, with other stakeholders such as consultants, etc., to really make this thing moving and to ensure that there's a longer term perspective of this whole story of low carbon development of agriculture. Because otherwise, who else would do this? I speak with the ABCD majors, with our trade partners. When I first started talking to them about the potential partnerships and what could be our collaboration in terms of low carbon commodities and identifying the premium, I used to think that I would be so impressed with how advanced they are. At some point, I realized that we're all on the same stage, and it's the role that each of the company has to play. Bring something to the table. I mean, it's all a very creative process. You have to talk to them. You have to think, okay, let's decide what could be the criteria here in terms of GHG emissions. What could be the approaches in terms of verifying? What could be the potential approach to calculate the premium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no sectoral standard yet, but it's up to us to really drive it, despite the disbelief, despite there may be frustration at some point. But I think it's up to the big agriculture companies to really show the way and not to be shown as someone just to blame, because in terms of the climate impact, but also someone to be relied on.
Just one follow-up question. You mentioned a variety of practices, low tillage, cover crops. How have you persuaded your farmers to adopt those practices in the lack of a premium?
So right now we're talking about our own operations.
Okay.
And to be honest, for example, if you talk about the inhibitors of nitrification, the rationale to really start implementing this was 2022 when there was a deficit of NPC and NPK, nitrogen fertilizers. So there was really a broader reasons to do this. Business reasons always going to be, or at least for a long time, still going to be the primary reason to do something. I'm happy with climate agenda being just a supporting aspect to this. It's just the point of finding the balance and finding the rationale, because when I talk to the director of agribusiness who's the key decision maker in here, his favorite question would be, okay, where the money is. And it's okay to find the money in something that's going to bring a positive impact. This is how it works.
Well, speaking of money, I've got to bring in the money man. Gianpiero, tell us a bit about how does EBRD engage with agriculture broadly, and give us some concrete examples, if you will.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here today. I'd like to say that I'm really delighted, because for us, Ukraine is one of the raison d'etre of the EBRD, and it's really much part of our identity. And incidentally, we are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, investors in the agri-food system in the country. So clearly, for us, the decarbonization agenda, sustainability agenda in the agribusiness sector is a key element, because it brings together a story of productivity on competitiveness, but also bring a story, of course, of solutions, to deliver on public goods. As a matter of fact, in the last 10 years, we've been financing over 2.3 billion euro of green finance in the sector across over 200 projects. And many of these projects, in fact, are in Ukraine. The way we look into this is through different lenses. On one side is to support the companies with the tools to understand better climate and sustainability related risks and incorporate these tools in the way they operate, the way they take decisions. One program we have is called Corporate Climate Governance Program, in fact, that we run in cooperation with EY, which is really about helping companies understanding both carbon-related risk, but also physical climate risk. And in this context is about informing the investment priorities, having better understanding of how risk can be distributed, but also engaging with the financial community on this basis. This has, of course, other co-benefits. There is an increasing investor base that is interested in investment that have a clear sustainability outcomes. But at the same time, offers also the possibility to link specific investments to, for example, the voluntary carbon markets or to other form of rewards. I'm thinking about the role of concessional finance coming from international national programs. Maybe one example here, since you've been asking. Recently, we signed a loan to a large company called Astarta, and they're going through a journey similar to Kernel. So they are improving the surface with low tillage and regenerative agriculture. And this was structured as sustainability-linked loans, where the finance is provided on the back of specific KPIs, specific targets. And these offer the combination of EBRD commercial funding, but also we work in close partnership with the Climate Investment Fund. They provided $10 million loan that is linked, whose actually interest rate is linked to the performance of the company. So this is an example of how you can create the incentive that Marta was talking about, but also really supporting a company in a journey towards increased sustainability of operations.
Thank you, Gianpiero. Anton, can I bring it back to you and get a perspective from you on what is the sort of help both on finance and technology that you would find useful in transitioning to more sustainable farming? Give us some, concrete examples, if you will.
Well, I must agree that the better teacher to farmers is crisis. I think for everybody the same as well. Crisis is a better teacher. So I reduced tillage, most popular practice in sustainable agriculture, and not because I was looking for some additional money. I was looking to make my farm more resilient to any kind of trouble I will have with the weather. Will it be very hot or will it be very rainy? And I think that before any financial instruments, before any financial incentives, it should come knowledge, because there is still too much conversation about what kind of practices, what kind of output, what to use. Is it risky or it is not? And I must underline that it's actually World Soils Day. And I can say that I made a lot of crime for my soils, I must convince. But I was following the industry advices. It was a typical industrial agriculture. And I was doing that for 10 years. And basically, I used the industrial knowledge. And what I did was awful. So I must say that before everything should be knowledge about what we are doing, what our aims, and how to reach that goals. And I'm spending too much time reading books, literature, and speaking with advisors. And basically, it's like a 50% of my time.
Thank you, Anton. That's a really interesting kind of perspective. Alessandro, if I could come back to you, what are some of the things you're finding to be the key levers for climate smart agriculture? We've spoken about a few, but I'd love to get some more.
Yeah, and I really reflect what Anton was saying. I started my own journey to regenerative agriculture 18 years ago on my own farm. And I can tell you it was a learning by doing process, because there was no science, there was no literature, there was no understanding really what is regenerative agriculture about as well. And I think since we landed the topic of regenerative agriculture at COP27, we've seen a fantastic coming together of minds, science, experts, and stakeholders in the value chain to really define this. The one thing that I want to be clear about, regenerative agriculture is not about a process. It's not a protocol that you apply on your farm. It is an outcome. And the outcome is that we're regenerating our soils, bringing them back to what is the natural equilibrium in terms of biome and interaction between that biome and root systems, and basically having that biome protecting and nourishing the plants insofar we can reduce crop inputs, both fertilizers, but also crop protection products, and achieve higher yields. But to get to the new equilibrium, we go through a period of decreased productivity on the field, which means that most farmers, they cannot afford not receiving an income in that period, and therefore financing becomes important. I think there are three elements that we need to think about. The first one is how we're going to finance the transition to regenerative agriculture. We have done strides. We moved from 10 years to make really an impact on soil organic carbon to a period of 4 years. But still, it is quite a period for a farmer to survive. And we discussed actually the UNFCCC pavilion actually on the other day, specifically on the topic of financing the transition to regenerative agriculture. This is where we need to take a multi-stakeholder approach. Governments have a key role in playing that and driving that transition. The private sector, the banking groups are interested in investing, but they still see agriculture as a risk, which honestly is annoying a lot of farmers, because probably farmers are the most conservative and risk-averse group of people in this world. But we need also the insurance sector to step in and to mutualize the risk, because the reality is you can have the best skills on your farm, you can have the best plan, but nature has a canny ability to put a spanner in the game all the time. I don't remember a single one of my plans that went according to plan in my last 10 years in this farm. The point for me, apart from financing, is science. We need to make it very simple for people to access the science, the evidence, the information they need to help into that transition. And what is important here to understand is that regenerative agriculture is hyper-local. This is not something where you just put something from a bottle into a field and all of a sudden your field is back to how it should be in a pristine prairie or forest. When we did our own transition, and finally we got things to work in our trial fields on one side of the farm, we went to try and apply exactly the same criteria on the other side of the farm, and guess what? It didn't work, because the biome is different, the soil is different, the conditions are different. So the way we get to regenerative agricultural outcomes needs to be localized and be very specific. But we have a wealth of knowledge now, and a working group was set up after COP27 to really figure out where the knowledge sits today across universities, research organizations, farmers, and sovereign national organizations. And we're looking at putting all that knowledge together to make it available to the world. The third point for me is the cultural change. Farmers, as mentioned, are a conservative bunch. I remember actually when I came to Denmark and I tried to convince a foreman to put flowers on the perimeter of the fields, he thought I was crazy. I said, no, it will attract pollinators. We get higher yields. And he said, I'm not gonna do it. He said, why? Because I don't want the neighbors to see me doing that, and then, I'll be embarrassed. I said, do it. Anyway, he did it, and guess what? Yields went up. And now you can actually see him on YouTube talking about, look at the flowers, look at the bees, look at my fields now. It really works. And he became a promoter. So we really need to use networks of what I call model farms to help wider communities bring all this together. And this leads me to the final point. Transition to regenerative agriculture has to be just. It is so easy for us to say, you know what, let's take the big amounts of lands that we have in Brazil, in Ukraine, maybe in some parts of Europe. Let's move very rapidly to regenerative agriculture. Let's sequestrate huge amounts of carbon dioxide in those soils at speed. So we actually move the needle on climate change, but we're going to be leaving behind millions of smallholder farmers and the global south. We need to create solutions that can be easily adopted also by those stakeholders, which are very important to our food systems as well.
Thank you, Alessandro. Actually, Fred, if I could ask you, you've got a technology platform. Tell us a bit more about the technology that you use. I mean, particularly given that agriculture is such a varied, heterogeneous area, how do you standardize or how do you manage a platform? What kind of technology do you leverage to help farmers?
Well, I can tell you about one of the sort of most important technology pieces we have in Agreena is our MRV solutions. It means monitoring, reporting, and validating everything that happened on field level. We bought a company based out of London, a leading player in this area last summer, and it can really sort of it can tell us and map out everything that happens on an Agreena farmer. So we can via advanced AI picture technology, we can recognize tillage, min tillage, cover crops activity on field level, and so forth. So that's one of the sort of the technology plays that can, you know, leverage the scalability of what we do, but also really increase integrity, which we see sort of deeper problems with in the VCM market currently.
Thank you, Fred. I'm conscious of time. Let's go to closing comments from Marta, Alexandra, and then finally to Anton. You've sort of you've progressed on this journey. You've started on this journey. There are difficulties. What's on your wish list? What do you want for policy or customers? What would you like to see in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the right way to move forward would be to really engage with the relevant ministries and basically the government of Ukraine to establish a tailored evidence-based policy, climate policy framework for agriculture. So sort of a unified set of rules and guidances for all type of players. How can they interact? How can they partner in order to move this whole story forward and ensure that there's a long-term perspective of climate action for agriculture? Because at the end of the day, all of us on the same boat, whether it's a small or medium-sized farmer or whether it's a large agri-holding, all of us are interested in having increase in soil organic carbon and in ensuring productivity of soils and ensuring high yields. But it's only so much we can do on our own. I mean, different methodologies, different approaches, different everything. So this is a thing, the next step would be to really work closely with the ministries and provide to share our expertise that we have and to really enlighten them and provide the insights and support them so that we can move forward together.
Thank you, Marta. Alexandra, over to you. If I could ask you, what's on your wish list as you think about European integration and how sustainability is progressing?
Well, if you don't mind, I have some things I'd like to reflect on. I'll be as short as possible. So first of all, what I'd love to say is that Ukrainian agricultural sector has been implementing more sustainable practices for quite long ago. If that wouldn't be war in Ukraine, I think the process would be even speeding up right now because of the European integration. That's one thing. The second thing is that sometimes it's not just financial incentives that come from outside, from the company, that make the company implement more sustainable things. They definitely, companies, especially COP members, that's what I know from speaking with them, they have started implementing more sustainable practices, as well as Anton did, saying that something does not work correctly, so that you need to change. And this sustainable change was actually working better. Therefore, it's not just finance from outside, but also an understanding that with the more sustainable practices, you can actually work better with the soil. That's the second thing. The third thing is that definitely right now in Ukraine, we have quite difficult situation in terms of sharing the information, sharing the knowledge, and implementation of the sustainability practices in terms of actually adding extra finances in order to implement them. with the European integration and with ongoing war, the situation might even worse. Therefore, I would highly appreciate if Agrina could also expand the work in Ukraine and attract as many companies in Ukrainian agricultural sector as possible, so that the companies and the sector itself will become more green and green. In terms of European integration, well, we definitely would need to discuss more with the EU how we will actually change our way of working and how EU can also help us with this, right?
Thank you very much. Before I give Anton the last word, Gianpiero, any sort of final comments from you on this?
Very, very quickly, 2 points. One, I want to elaborate on what Marta was just saying. You know, it's really important that we need to see a progress in the integration of solutions for the agricultural sector in the national climate strategies and policy. We don't see enough, let's say, detail, enough definition of what are the directional targets. This is important for the sector, is important for the investors, is important for the policymakers. And the second point, I really wish that, you know, a fast development of the carbon instruments, the carbon markets associated to the sector. We need the standards, we need the protocols, and I think there is a strong potential for the sector. The buyers are emerging, and so this will also help accelerating the pace of the investments.
Thank you. And Anton, I want to give you the sort of closing remarks in the sense that this transition has to work for the farmer, otherwise it will not happen. So maybe a couple of remarks from you on, you know, what you'd like to see, what you think may be missing.
Thank you very much for that possibility to say that words. I want to mention that for farmers, it's a transition. And for a world, it's food security. So it depends how you want to understand that situation. And about carrots and sticks, I'm sure that soil, climate are the wealth of the nations, for sure, and should be controlled correctly. It should be official, it should be very responsible. But additionally, we still need that sense of belonging to that land, and that's how it should be, that the feeling of ownership will help us to take care of our soils, lands, and nature. And I'm sure it should be inside of political agenda when we are defining our policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. That's a great way to close. Again, I want to thank all of you, the expertise amongst all of you, and you know, coming from various parts of the value chain is really useful. It's really encouraging to see how food and agriculture is elevated in this COP, and I hope it will continue to be more tightly integrated, as you said. So thanks all, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.